Albert, the Butcher. Doyle ruled East London with a cleaver and a cold heart. Reggie, Red, Stokes dismantled that kingdom without ever raising his voice. Jayden, Smoke. Khan turned violence into viral fame. And somewhere in the shadows, a ghost named Reggie might still be pulling the strings. This isn't just a story about gangs. It's the brutal evolution of British gang culture. From blood-stained streets to encrypted networks, power never disappeared. It just changed form. East London in the late 1980s wasn't just a place. It was a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Broken homes, rising unemployment, and political indifference left entire neighborhoods suffocating in desperation. Amid this chaos emerged a man who would come to define an era of violence, control, and fear. Albert, the Butcher. Doyle. With a shaved head, a thick Cockney accent, and arms covered in faded prison ink, Albert didn't just earn his nickname, he lived it. His weapon of choice wasn't a gun or a blade. It was a butcher's cleaver, stained with the legacy of 100 warnings no one dared ignore. Albert started small, working as muscle for backroom gambling dens in Bethnal Green. He was the man who'd show up when someone missed a payment or crossed the wrong line. But while others used fists or threats, Albert believed in permanence. A missing finger, a gashed thigh, a carved message into someone's chest. These were his calling cards, and people remembered. By 1987, he wasn't just collecting for others. He had started his own crew, known on the streets as the Iron Fangs, a name whispered with unease in dimly lit alleyways and behind shuttered shop fronts. The Iron Fangs weren't sophisticated, but they didn't need to be. Their message was simple: comply or bleed. They took over pubs and converted them into cash laundering fronts. Nightclubs soon followed, where behind every bass drop was a transaction: ecstasy, heroin, or bodies for sale. Teenage boys hungry for power and belonging were offered tracksuits and burner phones in exchange for loyalty. And those who resisted were made examples of, sometimes hung upside down from balconies, sometimes left outside police stations with tongues removed and notes stapled to their chests that read, "Don't talk." Yet behind the bloodshed, Albert wasn't just a savage. He was strategic. He knew when to pay off a constable, when to silence a journalist, and when to donate anonymously to a struggling community center, just to keep the streets quiet. He ruled not just through terror, but through a twisted sense of order. People hated him, but they also feared what would come without him. In a strange way, he had become the devil the East End knew. But not everyone admired him. Among the sea of frightened boys he took under his wing was one who didn't cower: Reggie, Red, Stokes. At just 16, Reggie had already shown signs of something different. He wasn't loud like the others. He watched. He listened. He absorbed Albert's methods like religion. Albert saw himself in Reggie and began grooming him to lead, not realizing he was nurturing the architect of his own downfall. Reggie worked silently, rising through the ranks, earning respect not through brutality, but through efficiency. He didn't need to shout to command a room. People simply listened. Albert, in his arrogance, never saw it coming. He believed Reggie was his legacy. But Reggie didn't want to inherit Albert's empire. He wanted to burn it down and build something cleaner, sharper, and deadlier in its place. By the time Albert noticed the cracks, it was too late. His lieutenants were turning, his profits shrinking, and whispers of a new crew began circulating. Still, he dismissed it. Kids play games, he once told an associate. But the game ended the night he disappeared after a meeting with Reggie in an abandoned meat warehouse. 2 days later, his body was found hanging from a meat hook, his own cleaver embedded in his spine, the Iron Fang symbol carved into his cheek, crossed out with an X. No witnesses, no cameras. Just a message: the old king was dead, and a new era was about to begin. Reggie, Red, Stokes was not the kind of man who raised his voice or sought attention. He didn't have to. By the time he turned 20, he had already dismantled the empire of Albert, the Butcher. Doyle without firing a single bullet in public. Reggie understood something Albert never did. Violence gets you noticed, but control keeps you invisible. While the Butcher ruled through fear and spectacle, Reggie built something far more dangerous in the shadows. He called them the Red Vultures. The Red Vultures weren't a gang in the traditional sense. They didn't tag walls or start turf wars over postcodes. They were a network, tight, disciplined, and silent. Every member had a role, and every move was calculated. Reggie recruited those the system had already written off: orphans, runaways, ex-foster kids, former addicts. But instead of giving them knives and egos, he gave them structure, discipline, and a sense of purpose. For many, it was the first time anyone had believed in them. But Reggie's belief came with a price: unquestionable loyalty. Among his earliest recruits was Milo Baines, a street kid known for pickpocketing wallets on the Central Line before he was even 12. Under Reggie, Milo became something else entirely: a courier, a fixer, a gunman. Then there was Tanya Knox, a failed social worker who lost her license after a scandal involving stolen grant money. Reggie found her drunk in a Hackney pub and gave her a second chance. She became the Vulture's financial brain, laundering hundreds of thousands through shell charities and fake construction firms. The Vultures spread across East London with surgical precision. They took over housing estates without firing a shot. Reggie understood that violence drew headlines, but influence earned protection. He paid struggling single mothers rents in exchange for silence. He kept young boys off the corners by putting them to work in garages or delivery services he secretly owned. And while rival gangs were busy slashing each other up over turf, Reggie was siphoning power from beneath their feet. By the early 2000s, the Red Vultures had moved into Manchester and Birmingham. Their operations diversified: drug trafficking, illegal gambling, credit card fraud, even art smuggling. But Reggie's brilliance lay in his ability to evolve. He anticipated police crackdowns before they happened, sometimes using informants within the force. No meetings were ever held in the same place twice. No names were ever used on phones. No guns were kept where they could be found. Every operation was compartmentalized. If one arm was cut off, the rest kept moving. But for all his control, Reggie had his weaknesses. He was meticulous to a fault and rarely trusted anyone outside his inner circle. Paranoia became part of his daily routine. He changed cars every 3 days, never slept in the same flat twice, and used burner phones like candy wrappers. To the public, he didn't exist. To the police, he was a ghost. They knew his name but could never pin him to anything. Even the murders that occurred under his regime were clean. No witnesses, no prints, no motive. Then came the message no one expected. Albert Doyle's body was found in a refrigerated meat locker in a derelict warehouse. The weapon was unmistakable: Albert's own cleaver. The symbol of the iron fangs carved into his face and violently crossed out. The media exploded with speculation. Old allies of the Butcher went into hiding. The streets buzzed with rumors, but nobody dared speak Reggie's name. The Red Vultures had not only eliminated their greatest threat, they had announced their arrival without saying a word. In the months that followed, Reggie tightened his grip. Those who had mocked or doubted him began to vanish. Other gangs either submitted quietly or disappeared completely. The Red Vultures didn't just dominate, they cleansed. No flashy shootouts, just silence. The police called it eerie. Locals called it peace. But beneath that calm was a machine, cold, ruthless, and always watching. Reggie had created something more than a gang. He had created a system. One that didn't bleed in the open, but always fed on weakness. And in a city that once belonged to brutes, it now bowed to a strategist. The age of spectacle was over. The era of silent control had begun. In the early 2000s, Reggie Stokes stood at the height of his power. The Red Vultures controlled more than half of London's underworld economy, with tentacles reaching into Manchester, Birmingham, and beyond. From the outside, It looked as though nothing could shake their empire. But inside the machine, cracks had already begun to form, hairline fractures that Reggie either ignored or underestimated. He had built something vast and calculated. But even the most disciplined system starts to corrode when its people begin to dream beyond the rules. It began with Milo Baines. Once a loyal soldier, Milo had grown tired of Reggie's quiet, invisible style. He missed the fear, the adrenaline, the chaos. He started operating on his own, selling product without clearance, recruiting outside the network, even brandishing firearms on security cameras, a move Reggie explicitly forbade. Reggie warned him once, then again. But Milo didn't listen. He had a taste of power, and he wanted more. Eventually, he became reckless, showing up high during collections and making threats Reggie never authorized. The final straw came when a nightclub deal went sideways in Camden, leaving 2 people dead and a CCTV trail that led directly to Milo. Reggie had no choice. Milo's body was found floating in the Thames, wrists zip-tied, with a red Vultures card taped to his forehead. It was both punishment and a message. Disloyalty would not be tolerated. But Milo wasn't the only problem. Tanya Knox had become the gang's financial backbone, managing offshore accounts and laundering money through everything from art auctions to shell NGOs. She was brilliant, maybe too brilliant. Over time, she began siphoning money quietly, redirecting tiny sums from Reggie's operations into accounts under different aliases. At first, it went unnoticed, buried in the layers of complex financial data. But then she slipped. A discrepancy in a charity fund caught Reggie's eye. When he confronted her, she denied everything. But Reggie had already made up his mind. Tanya disappeared 2 weeks later, her apartment cleared out overnight, her car abandoned on a roadside near Dover. Her body was never found, and her name was never spoken again within the network. With his inner circle collapsing, Reggie grew even more paranoid. He stopped attending meetings in person. He began communicating only through intermediaries, who themselves didn't know who they were delivering messages for. He moved between safe houses like a fugitive, trusting no one fully. Those who were once close to him said he had become a ghost, sharp, methodical, but hollow. The man who once built an empire on logic and loyalty was now held together by suspicion. And then came the final blow. Detective Shane Palmer had been a rising star in the Metropolitan Police's organized crime division. He was young, ambitious, and street-savvy, a man who knew how to listen more than he spoke. What no one realized, not even Reggie, was that Shane had been undercover for over 6 years, buried deep within the Vultures under an alias. He had earned trust slowly, first as a low-level associate, then as a middleman, eventually gaining access to high-level operations. Reggie saw him as a quiet operator, someone who reminded him of himself in the early days. But Shane wasn't loyal to Reggie. He was loyal to the badge. In a coordinated strike led by Shane's task force, dozens of Vulture-owned businesses were raided in one night. Millions in assets were seized, accounts frozen, and over 40 arrests made across the UK. Safe houses were compromised, couriers captured, and entire operations exposed. It was the biggest blow the gang had ever faced. But Reggie? He was gone. No one knew where he vanished to. Some whispered about a remote villa in Morocco. Others believed he had taken his own life to avoid capture. But no body was ever found, no proof ever surfaced. It was as if he dissolved into thin air. The empire he built, once so untouchable, was crumbling in his absence. The Red Vultures were declared finished by the media. Headlines called it the death of British gang culture. But on the streets, no one celebrated. There was a silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like a warning, because those who knew Reggie also knew one truth. Ghosts don't die. They wait. The fall of the Red Vultures left a vacuum in the streets, and nature, especially on the streets, hates a vacuum. The police called it a victory, but it was short-lived. For the younger generation watching from the sidelines, the downfall of Reggie Stokes wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. The message wasn't, "Crime doesn't pay," but, "Next time, do it smarter." Into this open space stepped a new breed of gangsters. They weren't quiet like Reggie or brutal like the Butcher. They were loud, fast, and dangerously impulsive. And leading them was a teenage hurricane named Jayden, Smoke Khan. At just 17, Jayden was already infamous across South London. He didn't inherit a gang. He built one on social media. His crew, known as the Sons of Smoke, wasn't born in back alleys or pubs but online. They posted videos of motorbike chases, masked standoffs, and piles of cash stacked next to machetes. Their content spread like wildfire, racking up millions of views and drawing in followers like moths to a flame. While police tried to figure out who was in charge, Jayden was building an army of digital age delinquents. The Sons of Smoke were chaotic and unpredictable. Unlike the Vultures, who preferred silence and stealth, Smoke and his crew thrived on attention. They filmed their crimes like movie trailers. Knife fights in shopping centers, car thefts in broad daylight, even threats to rival crews, all broadcasted in real time. They didn't fear prison, they considered it a badge of honor. And for many watching from home, they weren't just criminals. They were celebrities. Jayden himself was a contradiction. Born to a single mother in Lewisham, he had grown up poor, angry, and overlooked. He was smart, brilliant even, but no one gave him the time of day. School labeled him a troublemaker, and social services gave up before they even started. He found validation online where views and likes replaced love and structure. His videos went viral before he turned 16, and by the time police began investigating, he had already built a reputation as one of the most dangerous young men in the city. The Sons of Smoke operated in clusters, small, aggressive units that struck quickly and vanished. They dealt primarily in drugs, weapons, and intimidation. Their rivals weren't just other gangs, but anyone who questioned their dominance. One of their most infamous moments came in 2019 when a stabbing was live-streamed on social media. The victim was Devon Cole, a former Red Vultures associate who had tried to rebuild a quiet life. Smoke had seen him as a symbol of the past, so he made an example of him in front of millions. The video was taken down, but not before it changed the game entirely. The violence that followed was unlike anything the city had seen in decades. Schools became battlegrounds. Hospitals increased security. Teachers were threatened, social workers attacked, and entire communities gripped by fear. But the most terrifying thing wasn't just the brutality. It was how fast it spread. Other cities began to see copycat groups. The Sons of Smoke had become a movement. But empires built on ego collapse faster than they rise. Inside Smoke's circle, betrayal was brewing. One of his cousins, who had quietly grown tired of the chaos, leaked sensitive footage and names to the police. It wasn't out of morality, it was self-preservation. He knew the walls were closing in, and he didn't want to go down with the rest. In 2021, a major raid shattered the gang's structure. Dozens were arrested. Weapons, drugs, and burner phones were seized. And Smoke, he was caught in the back of a stolen BMW on the A12, trying to flee to Birmingham. His face, once a symbol of rebellion, now plastered across every news outlet as the face of downfall. But even in a cell, Jayden Khan remained influential. His arrest didn't stop the chaos. Because by then, the Sons of Smoke had become more than a gang. They were a brand, a mindset, an idea. And ideas don't die in handcuffs. They evolve. They spread. And just like that, the streets, once ruled by steel and silence, were now ruled by spectacle and speed. By 2025, gang culture in Britain no longer looked like what it once was. The street corner dealers, the flashy standoffs, the viral knife fights, those were fading. In their place, something more invisible, more sophisticated, and infinitely more dangerous was rising. The world had moved online, and so had the underworld. Emerging from the shadows was an entity no one could fully understand, yet everyone feared. They called themselves the Council. No graffiti, no collars, no territory wars. The council didn't announce themselves with blood or bravado. They moved in silence, through code, networks, and encrypted devices. Their presence wasn't seen on street corners, but on digital ledgers, darknet forums, and untraceable cryptocurrency transfers. To the outside world, it was unclear if the council was even real. Just whispers, rumors, urban legends shared among young dealers and old detectives alike. But those within the underground knew better. The council was very real, and it was everywhere. Theories about its origins varied. Some believed it was formed by former leaders of the Red Vultures who had survived the Empire's fall. Others said it was the last remnants of old-school gangsters and corrupt businessmen pooling resources in a final bid for control. But the most chilling theory was that Reggie, Stokes himself had returned, not as a man of the streets, but as a phantom pulling strings from afar. There were no photos, no sightings. Just one fact: after a period of silence, organized crime in Britain became more efficient, more ruthless, and less detectable. Something had changed. The council operated like a corporate syndicate. Every move was deliberate. Instead of street runners, they used food delivery services and ride-share drivers. Instead of stashing weapons in alleyways, they stored them in smart storage lockers rented under fake IDs. Drug drops were done via drones. Encrypted messaging apps replaced burner phones. No names, no meetings. Just clean, trackless operations. Their reach extended far beyond drugs and weapons. The council was deeply embedded in cybercrime. They ran credit card fraud rings, orchestrated ransomware attacks, and even hacked into payroll systems of companies to reroute funds. In 2024, a London hospital's entire patient data was locked down for 3 days. The city blamed hackers. But the underground knew. It was the council flexing its muscles. What made the council terrifying wasn't just their tactics. It was their discipline. There were no public feuds, no flashy members. They recruited based on skill, not reputation. A 14-year-old coding prodigy was worth more to them than a seasoned brawler. They offered large sums to accountants, programmers, and data analysts who would look the other way or lend a hand. And if someone betrayed them, they didn't retaliate with a bullet. They erased them, digitally, financially, and in some cases, physically, without leaving a trace. Police couldn't keep up. By the time they got warrants, the servers were wiped. By the time they arrested one player, another filled their place, already briefed, already working. Detectives admitted that the council was like trying to fight smoke. You could see its effects, feel its presence, but never hold on to it. The public, meanwhile, lived in an uneasy calm. Violent street crime had gone down. Knife attacks and drive-bys were rarer. But there was a strange stillness, an artificial peace. Some thought it was a sign of progress. Others, especially those who'd lived through the eras of the Butcher and Reggie Stokes, recognized it for what it was: a silence enforced by fear, not by justice. The council didn't need to rule with blood. They ruled with control. Every transaction, every movement, every secret could be monitored, influenced, or monetized. And those who stepped out of line found their lives quietly dismantled. Bank accounts frozen. Careers destroyed, families threatened with nothing more than a message on a locked phone. British gang culture hadn't ended. It had evolved into something colder, quieter, and far more efficient. There were no more kings, no more gunslingers, only shadows. Because in modern Britain, real power didn't walk the streets. It watched from behind screens, moved money with invisible hands, and whispered through the code of the council.